Okay, kiddos, last thing we talked about yesterday during Lee Harvey Oswald's flight is that Ted Calloway, the owner of a used car lot, went to the scene of the shooting. He picked up Tippett's gun. He hailed down a taxi cab that was driven by William Scoggins, and they simply drove the neighborhood looking for the murderer. And you probably should have that little map in front of you that I drew to make sense on this. Well, Oswald continues to flee down the alley behind Jefferson Boulevard. So this is Jefferson Boulevard, which is kind of the main street of Oak Cliff. And this is the next street, and this is the alley, so to speak. So he's in the alley just off of Jefferson Boulevard. And he passes behind a Texaco gas station, which you guys have no idea what that is, but they were very popular back in those days. He passes behind a Texaco gas station. In other words, the face of the gas station is on Jefferson Avenue, looking out on Jefferson Avenue, and the back of it's in the alley. So he passes by this Texaco gas station. He takes off his light-colored Eisenhower jacket and drops it behind the gas station. And he evidently does that. Nobody really knows his thinking because he doesn't want to be identified with the jacket on for the person that shot the police officer, I'm guessing. But he takes off his light Eisenhower jacket as he's going down the alley. Remember, he's going opposite the way he was walking originally. And he discards his light jacket behind the Texaco station. Well, he continues to head south down the alley, and then he gets out of the alley and actually gets on Jefferson Boulevard and starts walking down Jefferson Boulevard, which again, if you're in Oak Cliff, is kind of the main street of the suburb of Oak Cliff and Dallas, okay? So he's walking down Jefferson Boulevard. He's gotten out of the alley, and he's made kind of a left turn, and he's now on Jefferson Boulevard. And then he's starting to hear police sirens. Okay, he's starting to hear police sirens, not responding to the Kennedy shooting, because nobody knows that yet. Responding to what?
The police.
The Tippett shooting. Okay, so he gets a little paranoid. He hears these sirens. So he gets nervous and he ducks into what we call the vestibule of Hardy's shoe store. Anybody know what a vestibule is? Yeah, so you know, here's your store, you know, your Main Street and all the stores like in Worland are all kind of together. And so your sidewalk is here and your door just opens and you go in, right? That's kind of how they work on Main Street here. Maybe there's some that have a vestibule, but basically what this is the storefront is here, and they have an area here before you go in the door, and here's the store. And this area in front is called a vestibule. And what he did is he got paranoid and he walked into the vestibule area, which was a little off Main Street, and was kind of hiding himself. And so I'm looking, if I was in the store, I'd be looking at the window, and he'd be where Cherith is in the vestibule, and the sidewalk would be out there, okay? Well, that Hardy's shoe store was located at 213 Jefferson Boulevard, okay? 213 Jefferson Boulevard was this Hardy's shoe store. Well, it just so happened that the manager of that shoe store, a guy by the name of Johnny Brewer, looks out the front window of the store, and what does he see? What's he see? Oswald. And he sees a nervous-looking fellow. He has no idea who he is. But he sees Oswald standing in that recessed vestibule area outside the storefront. Sees a guy. And he was later quoted as saying about Oswald, he said, quote, "He looked scared and his shirt tail was not tucked in as if he had been running." So obviously he picked up that this guy was kind of scared and hiding out, and the shirt tail was not in. He looked a little disassembled. Well, Brewer continued to watch Oswald as he stood in the vestibule area of the store, and he watched him leave and watched him turn right and head back down Jefferson Boulevard toward the Texas Theater. So Johnny Brewer watches Oswald leave his store entrance. He watches Oswald step out of the vestibule and turn right and head down toward the Texas Theater on Jefferson Boulevard. Here's Johnny Brewer right here, by the way. one of the toughest signatures you could get. He doesn't sign much. Well, at 1:40 p.m., Brewer decides to step out of his store, and he follows Oswald, and he watches Oswald enter the theater walking past the ticket booth without paying. Okay? So, evidently, Brewer, something about Oswald catches Brewer's attention. He seems a little suspicious. At 1:40, Brewer steps out of the store window and follows Oswald as he enters the theater, and he notices he enters, he doesn't buy a ticket. Okay? The movie showing that day is right back here. Here's a poster from that movie. I'll move this. The movie showing that day was entitled War is Hell. War is Hell. And also, it was a double feature. Cry of Battle was also playing. But that is a replica of the original movie poster that was hanging in the Texas Theater. So the Texas Theater was showing a double feature that day. One movie was called War is Hell, and the other one was Cry of Battle. Now, I'm just going to give you a little side note here. You might wonder, what was War is Hell about? It was about a Korean War. It was a Korean War drama. And the actor that starred in it was Baines Barrett. Baines Barrett. There's probably a reason I'd tell you that, because it really doesn't have anything to do with what's going to happen here, right? But there's a story behind it. So the two movies showing that day in the Texas Theater were War is Hell and Cry of Battle. And War is Hell was a Korean War drama starring Baines Barrett. The reason I tell you that is that actor, Baines Barrett, had the exact same birthday as President Kennedy. May 29th of 1917. Just a little iconic. We'll throw that in on you. Okay? May 29th, 1917. Now let's picture our story. So, Brewer walks down there, follows Oswald to Texas Theater, and he watches the guy go without paying. What might be the next thing you would do if you were Brewer, considering the fact that ticket booths were outside the doors of the theater, not inside, like when you go into the Washington Quinn, you walk inside and pay. This was a booth, kind of like a ticket booth outside. What might be the first thing you did if you're Johnny Brewer after watching him do that? Absolutely. Ticket taker was a gal by the name of Julia Postal. And he went up to Julia Postal and said, hey, did that guy that just entered the theater pay for a ticket? Well, how could he miss her? Or excuse me, how could she miss him go in? If the ticket booth is right out in front of the theater, you know, before you go to the door, how could she miss him going in there? It's the only way she misses him going in there. She's not in there. Where's she at? Anybody want to guess? She's out on the curb listening to the sirens, trying to figure out what's going on. So she left her ticket booth because the movie had already started. Not a lot of people come in after the movie starts. I suppose a few do. Those type of people drive me nuts, especially when they sit right in front of you, when you pick the seat with nobody sitting in front of you, because you got there early. But anyway, so anyway, she's out on the curb listening to the sirens and has a little radio listening to all this stuff that's going on during the course of the day, and he walks right by him. Now there was another guy in there, a guy by the name of Warren Butch Burroughs, and he was a younger man. You can kind of look at him. They dressed different then, but he was a guy that was in there, and he was stocking the candy shelf, and he was kind of leaned down stocking the candy shelf, and he didn't see Oswald come in either. So you got two people that aren't going to be very good witnesses to Oswald being in that theater because they weren't paying attention. Julia Postal was out on the curb listening to the sirens in the radio about the assassination of Kennedy and wondering what these other sirens are about. And Warren Butch Burroughs is actually putting candy in the concession area there, and Oswald walks right behind him as well. Well, Julia Postal's listening to these sirens. She's thinking some guy snuck into the movie theater, so what does she do? No? Calls the police and tells the police some suspicious character just went into the Texas Theater. Now, you don't call the police because somebody walked into the theater without paying. But all this is adding up, right? So she's thinking, Johnny Brewer's with her, and he's thinking, oh, this light look kind of suspicious. And she's thinking, well, that's kind of weird. You know, these sirens are going on, what's going on? And when they call the police and they say, hey, a mysterious guy went into the theater without paying, who do they think the guy is? Guy that shot Tippett. So they respond in spades, so to speak. They immediately respond to Postal's call, because they think that this is the guy that shot Officer Tippett. The Cresden's assassin has nothing to do with this at this point. So, at 1:48 p.m., and we're still on November 22nd, 1963, at 1:48 p.m., 6 police cars and 16 police officers arrive at and enter the Texas Theater. At 1:48 p.m., 6 police officers and, 6 police cars and 16 police officers arrive and enter the Texas Theater. Now, among those 16 officers are these 4 fellas right here. Paul Bentley, Gerald Hill, Ray Hawkins, and M.N. McDonald. Those 4 fellows that are on your ID sheet are among the 16 police officers that arrive. Police Sergeant Gerald Hill, Police Investigator Ray Hawkins, Police Detective Paul Bentley, Police Officer M.N. McDonald. For your sake, they're all police officers. Don't worry about their rank. Those 4 people are among the 16 that arrive. Gerald Hill, Ray Hawkins, Paul Bentley, M.N. McDonald. Now, prior to these police officers coming, picture this in your mind. This is the big screen, and these are the rows of chairs. Okay? There's an exit door here by the back alley, because the front of the way the theater sits, the theater's here and Jefferson here is here, and this is that alley that Oswald was walking down, but then got out of the alley and went onto Jefferson. Well, there's an exit door right here. And Johnny Brewer is standing by the exit door, which is at the back of the theater, kiddos, but actually where the screen is. Does that make sense? Okay? And pretty soon, he's standing there, and he hears noises in the alley in here. What are those noises? Who's back there? No. Police officers. Okay, police officers. Okay? Well, when Johnny Brewer hears these noises in the alley near this exit door, he opens the door. And police investigator Ray Hawkins grabs him and sticks a shotgun up in his face. Because he doesn't know who he is, does he? He thinks he might be this guy that snuck into the theater. So poor old Johnny Brewer, he's made his way into the theater kind of trying to figure out where this guy is that snuck in. And he's standing back here at the back exit kind of looking into the crowd, see if he can figure out which guy this is that snuck in. And he hears a noise, he opens the door, and Ray Hawkins sticks a shotgun in his face. Well, Brewer quickly identifies himself, and investigator Hawkins asks Brewer what? What's he asking? What's that? Yeah, do you see the guy in here that snuck in? He asks Brewer if he knows where the guy is that snuck in. Is this guy still in the theater? And while Brewer was standing here prior to the noise in the alley, he actually looked through the crowd because there wasn't that many people at the movie and said, hey, there's the guy right there, in his mind. Okay? So after Brewer identified himself, Hawkins asked Brewer if the man was still in the theater, and Brewer acknowledged that the man was still in the theater because there were 16 people watching the movie that day. 16. Well, once the police officers figured out that Brewer knew where this guy was in the theater, they asked him to point him out to us. Okay? And Brewer basically was standing back here, and he looked around, he just pointed, there he is back there, to the police officers. Now Oswald was sitting, and there's a lot more rows of chairs here. But he's sitting in the 5th seat, 3 rows from the back. So 1, 2, 3, he's sitting in like the 5th seat. And mine isn't a great drawing. He wasn't really in the middle. He was more towards that side. There's probably 50 seats, I don't know. Anyway, he was sitting in the 5th seat from the aisle. Well, Hawkins walks down this side of the aisle, and M.N. McDonald walks down this side of the aisle. And as they are walking, Oswald stands like he's going to skedaddle, and he figures pretty soon he's got nowhere to go, and he ends up in the 2nd seat. So he originally gets in the 5th seat, and as Officer Hawkins is coming up the right side and Officer McDonald's coming up the left side of the aisle, he's thinking, uh-oh, I better get out of here. And he stands, and then he figures out, I'm not getting out of here, and he simply then sits in the 2nd seat. It's 1:50 p.m. And as McDonald approaches Oswald by going into the aisle, from the aisle into the seated area, he asks Oswald to stand up. So M. McDonald is on this side, Hawkins on the other side, and as McDonald makes his way into the row, he asks Oswald to stand up. And when he asks Oswald to stand up, Oswald blurts out, quote, "Well, it's all over now." That's what Oswald blurts out. Well, it's all over now. Well, Oswald stands up as ordered and then punches Officer McDonald in the face while reaching for his .38 caliber revolver, which he has in his waistband. So as he stands up, as McDonald asked him to, after saying, well, it's all over now, he punches McDonald and starts to pull out his .38 caliber revolver, which is hidden in his waistband. Now these pistols, if you've seen them, when you pull the trigger, you have a cylinder. And when you pull a trigger, the cylinder turns, and then the hammering, your hammering, what do you call it? Your hammer of your pistol hits the firing pin and it goes off. So, Oswald takes his gun out, and you point at me. Go ahead. He points it at McDonald, and he pulls the trigger. And McDonald just happens to grab the gun as he pulls the trigger, and 2 things happen. The hammer hits his hand, and that revolving cylinder doesn't turn because he's got it so tight. Otherwise, he shoots McDonald in the theater. Okay? So lucky for McDonald, he grabbed the pistol with his hand, and the gun's firing hammer struck his hand, and his grip didn't allow the cylinder to turn to put the bullet into place to fire. Well, at this point, Officer Paul Bentley's there. He's one of the 4 we talked about. And what does he do, Macklin, when he sees McDonald grab that gun and Oswald trying to kill him? What does Bentley do? He didn't even react that much. He took his fist and popped Oswald pretty hard right above the eye. Popped him. And the reason I say that is because you're going to see that, that mark when he's arrested. So after this incident, Officer Paul Bentley reaches back and he gives Oswald a good one right in the head. And the police began to rush to that area, and they subdue Oswald. They're going to arrest him. And he kept yelling, "I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest." Well, that's exactly what he was doing. That's the first kind of example of how off the wall this guy is, that you'll learn more about. So as he's being arrested and they're trying to get him under control, trying to subdue him, he's yelling at the top of his lungs, "I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest." Which in the whole time, what's he doing? Resisting arrest. Well, Oswald is then handcuffed by Sergeant Gerald Hill, and he's taken from the theater to a waiting police car that would take him to police headquarters in downtown Dallas. Now, in your handouts, and I'm not going to take the time to read them today, but you're going to see affidavits, sworn affidavits by Helen Markham, Ted Callaway, Julia Postal, and M.N. McDonald. These are sworn affidavits that they swore to afterwards. I want you to read those before we get to the next test material and read what their statements are. They're pretty interesting. They're copies of the originals. Okay, Helen Markham, who put her hands over her face. Ted Callaway, who was the used car salesman who picked up Tippett's gun. Julia Postal, the ticket taker, and M.N. McDonald, the man that actually made the arrest. Here's a picture of M.N. McDonald right here, holding the pistol that he took from Oswald. I want you to read those. Now, I want to back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about where Oswald was staying before we get to the next subtopic. As I mentioned before, and we'll get to this later because everything kind of circles around, when we give you the later profile on Lee Harvey Oswald, tell you about him from birth to death, you'll understand this a little better, but I just want to let you know that he defected to Russia. He was a United States Marine and he defected to Russia. And he came back with a Russian wife who had had one child and was pregnant with a second. They moved back to the Dallas area. He couldn't find work. He and his wife became estranged. He was very abusive, both physically and mentally, and she basically separated from him. And she went to live with a lady by the name of Ruth Payne, who she had met. And Ruth Payne was separated from her husband.